So once I get this streaming up, then I will put it. Okay, so we are live now.
Okay.
So, hello, family, friends of Trivia's Inspirational Radio. Of course, I am Trivia, and I have a special guest. She is going to be kicking off our series of our Pastor's Wife Chat. And if you don't know, like I know, being a church member is the funnest experience that we have ever encountered. But guess what? There are some things that we want you to know about, and we're going to take this time to just talk a little. We're going to share our thoughts. We're going to share our experiences. And guess what? Last thing, we're going to talk about the roles that we play in church, because we know that our roles are just play. We don't really do anything. We just sit back and watch our husbands preach. So we're going to talk about those roles and those expectations that our husbands have for us, and even the expectations for our roles that we have for ourselves. Are you ready, Miss Amy?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So before we begin, and while I'm sharing this to Facebook, can you tell us about yourself, where you're from, how long you've been a pastor's wife?
Well, my name is Amy. I have been, we've been in ministry together for now, 23 years. My husband is a lead pastor at a small church here in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And we've been here for about a month and a half, actually. We pastored previously in North Central Illinois, and we were there about 5 years. And then before that, we served as staff pastors at several churches, going back 23 years.
Wow. And that's so interesting, because for myself, I've been in ministry for about 12 or 13 years now. And my husband and I started a church. And when we started the church, one of the things that was really pressing to me is knowing that this was new. Neither one of us had done it before. We were really into, what were we into? Everything but what we thought we should have been into. But we were making things happen. And what was going on for me was, my husband had been a pastor for a long time. And I never knew. I remember before we got married, I said, oh, I believe that I'm going to be a pastor's wife. But I did not know that my husband was a pastor at the time. How did you feel taking on the role of a pastor's wife when your husband became a pastor?
For me, I was called to serve in ministry at a very young age. And my husband wasn't. He was a pastor's kid who had sworn off ministry and would never do it and didn't want to do it. And we'd been dating for a while. And I really felt God saying, look, I've called you to be in this ministry life, however that looks, but your husband is not, or your boyfriend at the time is not. And so I called him up one day and I said, listen, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about something. And he said, wait, I have to tell you something first. And he said, I was walking along at college today. I was walking along the sidewalk, and God told me that he wants me to be in full-time ministry. And I was going to break up with him at that point, because I was like, this is what I'm called to do, and you're not. And it just wouldn't work if we weren't. And so he said, well, what did you have to say? And I said, well, nothing. It's all good now. So for me, it was a role that I knew even from about 11 years old, not specifically that I would just be a pastor's wife, but that I would be in ministry. Amen. And so we've always served alongside each other, not just him at the front and me behind serving, but we've always served more side by side.
And it's interesting, because although I believe God told me that I was going to be married to a pastor, I never knew what was involved in it. I would not lie to you. I just knew that this was what I was supposed to be doing. Me always being that one that whenever I did something wrong, they were like, no, not you. You weren't out there smoking. You weren't out there drinking. And I was like, okay. So it was new to me. And being an introvert, that was probably the most challenging thing for me, because I was like, how in the world am I going to be in leadership over anybody when I'm scared of everybody. Now put me in a room and I can get used to you and I'm going to talk. But when they're calling you up on stage, they want you to serve the dinner. They want you to get the kids. They want you. And for a long time, I thought I had to do everything that they wanted me to do. I thought that I was supposed to be doing it. And so I realized many, many years later that wasn't what God called me to do. So this is why we're here today, because I need you to help me understand what are some roles that you've taken on as a pastor's wife, and were those roles something that you are already expected, or were they roles that were just placed on you and you just filled them?
Well, and let me preface it with this. When I felt called to ministry at a young age, I thought it was something totally different. So, and I think a lot of people go into ministry feeling this way. They think that they go in and they're just going to be up front and people are just going to be following the things that they say, and it's just going to be wonderful and everybody's going to be happy and it's just a wonderful experience. And that's kind of how I kind of thought it was. But the real role of a pastor's wife, honestly, a lot of times is whatever has to be done. And sometimes that was cleaning the toilets in the church. If we're going to be just real and honest, sometimes, especially if you're a pastor's wife in a smaller church, it's being the janitor. And so I've done that. It's being, I actually am a pastor's wife that plays the piano. So I'm that stereotype. So I end up playing the piano a lot, and I hate playing the piano, but I do it because it's a way to serve. There are all kinds of things that I do. I've taught Sunday school classes. For years, we just called ourselves the catch-all pastors. We just did whatever kind of, and like you said, I thought I had to do it all. And I'm in a place where I'm at now, the last month and a half, that I'm almost restarting everything and rethinking everything, because I don't know what to do with myself, because we're in a church where people already do step up and do things, and I'm not used to that. So I want to go in. I'm like, I want to take over this ministry and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. My husband goes, stop. You don't have to do everything. It's okay to just sit sometimes. And that's tough.
Yeah. I remember the first time hearing my husband say, I just need you to sit in the front and let me know that you're here. And I'm like, me sit still? Like,
right.
And it's been amazing to be able to just sit still and not do everything. And just, piggybacking on what you're saying, when I think about just being a church plant and starting a new church and having so few members, it's always that trying to figure out, well, what is the new members going to do? And if any pastor's wife is like me, my mindset is, you're not going to be here long. You can leave when you want to. I can't go nowhere. So in my mind, it's like, why am I allowing somebody else to do stuff? And I don't know how long they're going to stay. But again, I've learned that give them the roles. They may not be here a month. They may not be here 2 months, but at least that's 1 month or 2 months where you can just relax and do what you believe God is calling you to do. And I thought that being a pastor's wife was probably one of the most daunting things ever, because I felt like I had to do. I felt like my husband wanted me to run Sunday school. I felt like he wanted me to take care of the church books. I felt like I had to do all of these things. And when he would ask me, well, what is it that you want to do? Have you ever had that question? Asking you, what is it that you want to do?
Yeah. And I think that's what's been asked here. And I'm going, I don't know.
Yes.
Because I'm used to picking up and doing whatever is needed or whatever. And I'm not used to having the choice. And that's really, it's almost been an identity struggle for me, because I think sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves as pastors' wives to always be doing and always making sure that everything is running smoothly and always, um, smoothing over things that are rough and fixing situations and fixing things in the building. And we're doing all this stuff. And sometimes, it's the Mary and Martha story. And sometimes we just need to sit.
Yes.
And it's hard.
And it's, I love that, because I don't know about you, but I've had many days where I was just go to my husband and I'm like, I'm doing this and they are not respecting me. And
Yes.
I'm going to buy the toilet paper and I'm going to buy dessert. And he's like, well, what's wrong with what they're doing? They're doing what God called them to do. You're doing what God called you to do. And I'm like, but it's getting on my nerves. Well, you don't have to. You can do whatever you want to do. And I'm like, that don't make sense. I'm
Well,
not supposed to be a pastor's wife.
and we also have to give people a chance to mess up.
Yes.
And sometimes we have this perfectionist mindset of like, well, they need to do it this way because this is the way that we need to do it for the church to really, be successful. And sometimes we have to go, okay, we're just going to let them do it their way. And if it messes up, then we can work on it then. But we need to allow them the chance to serve and the chance.
Yep. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I say yep.
No, that's good. I just, and I think that's sometimes hard in ministry is allowing people to have a place, but it's actually very important for us to do is allow them to have a place.
So let me ask you a question, because I believe that we have to have that fundamental process for other people, but where do we get that same grace? Because I believe that that's where I mess up a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where do we get that same grace? That's a good question. I think it's so much easier for us sometimes to extend grace to other people, but it's so hard to extend it to ourselves. And I think that's where we have to rely on the Lord and say, okay, you provide the grace and I'll just listen. Because it is so much easier to extend it to somebody else. It's not easy for me to accept that, so that's something that we have to work on. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was one of the things that I believe that held me hostage for so long, because I'm like, okay, well, we have to give other people the freedom to mess up, but we can't mess up. We have to be perfect. We have to carry those roles and make sure that those roles don't lag. So as soon as somebody messes up, we have to fix them. Do you think that that's a real depiction of being a pastor's wife?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One pastor's wife that we served under told me this, and it really bothered me at the time, but I kind of see where she's coming from. But she said, you can't have a bad day. You have to go out there and slap a smile on your face. And to an extent, that's true. I think to an extent, there are times where we have to just kind of, pull up our big girl pants and we have to, go out there and help encourage. But on the flip side of that too, sometimes we have to let people in. And that's really hard to let people in because you're making yourself vulnerable to people. And I think we have to do that at sometimes because we'll go crazy. We will absolutely go crazy if we don't have some kind of an outlet. And one of the things that I've learned as a pastor's wife is that you have to have a few friends outside of church.
Oh, that's a good one. That is a good one. So keeping in contact with roles, because we really want to talk about roles. I was a hard nut to crack when I first started, probably up until about 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember being in a church meeting where they were saying, oh, we have to live life together. And I was like, oh, no, we don't. But how do you maneuver around the things that you have to do in church and keep them separate from outside of church? Because you have to work with certain people in the church.
Right.
And not make them feel any kind of way when you say, okay, we're working together in church, but we don't have to have this relationship outside of church.
Right. I think that's a really fine line to balance sometimes, but I think that there are certain things where I can be vulnerable with people and I can let them in to an extent, but I can't go to church people and say, hey, I'm really mad at my husband today. Your pastor did this. I can't do that because I can't take that relationship and kind of damage that between them and their pastor,
Right.
or say, I'm upset with this board member because they did this to me. Well, if you want to lose your job real quickly, that's where you do it, um, but that's where, as I mentioned, you have to have some people outside of the church as well. So I think that there is a fine line of, you do need friendships in the church. You do need to have community with the people in your church. You have to. You can't hate people in your church and serve them. You just can't. Like to sometimes, but you can't do that. You have to have a love for those people, and that comes from the community and fellowship that you have with them. But when it comes to my very closest relationships, I have a mom and a sister that I talk to all the time, and I can share things with them. And I also have a best friend that's a pastor's wife, and I go to her every single Sunday. It never fails. She will text me or I will text her, and we'll be like, hey, I'm praying for you today. Hey, I hope your service goes good today. I hope that crazy board member that you're having problems with is, settles down today. And, because I can tell her those things, hey, I'm going through this, and this person has really hurt me or has done something to offend me, and I'm trying to get over it. And she'll encourage me and all that, but I can tell her those things because she's not in that church and not by that. And
Right.
finding someone, and that's why these pastor's wife groups can be really important. And, things like you're doing here can be very important because you can find someone to be able to relate and know the things that you're going through.
And I love that because when I first became a pastor's wife, I searched. I feel like any pastor's wife that I could try to connect to, it was this shield that, no, I can't help you. I can't. And I thought that it was something wrong with me. So again, that sent me back to that, let me try to do everything because I don't want to look bad. I don't want to. And I was putting more on me so that when it came time to relate to the members, I couldn't because I felt overloaded. I felt overworked. I felt like all the fingers were being pointed at me. And most of the time they weren't, but that's how I felt. And I didn't have anybody outside of the church who could understand. So those who I did connect to in the church, I eventually got to a point where I didn't have those boundaries. So if I was doing too much of the book work, or if I was doing too much of this or that, and I was sharing with them, and it was like, no, that's not your husband. That's you. You got to get this together. And I'm like, oh, well, me, like, let me have my pity party, but you can't have a pity party with those you are serving with, because again, these are people who, at the time, I didn't realize that I was a leader. So these are people who you are leading, and they're looking at you crashing and burning because you're not supposed to. And one of the prominent couples that I always related to is as a president and his wife, because they're always under the microscope. And as a pastor and a pastor's wife and the kids, we're always under a microscope. So it's like, no, you better not mess up and do the wrong job or do something that you're not fit to do, because when you do and it messes up, they're looking at you. They're trying to figure out, well, you're not perfect. I'm not going to be perfect. But when none of us are called to be perfect, but at the same time, we all have roles to do. I might not be Betty Crocker. I might not be able to bake a cookie, but I know where my gifts and my skills are. And again, that goes back to me having a conversation with my husband, as you said, ask me what it is that I want to do or I believe I'm supposed to do. I'm going to always say, I don't know, because I think I'm supposed to do everything. But to
Yep.
have a conversation with my husband and he says, I just want you to sit down and pay attention while I'm preaching. You don't have to go wash the dishes and get the kids. And there's other people in the church that can do that. And it's like, oh, really? Really? I mean, and a reality sets in, and then we become a little bit free.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've gotten a lot of, in the past probably 4 or 5 years, a lot of freedom in knowing that I don't have to.
Right. Right. Yeah. We don't have to do anything. And, you know, making that balance for us, making that time for other things, time to take care of ourselves, time for our families and all of that. That can be hard sometimes because we always feel like there's something to be done. I got to get this done. I got to do this. We're always doing, doing, doing. And again, it goes back to the Mary and Martha story. Sometimes we just need to sit at Jesus' feet like everybody else.
Absolutely.
If you've got a church that supports that, you found a wonderful thing. If you've got a church that you have other people that says, hey, let me do that. Hey, I'll step up and do that. What a wonderful thing. But most of the time we have to train them to do that, because if we're constantly taking those roles, we're constantly, okay, I'm filling in here, I'm filling in here, I'm filling in here. Then they don't know that those spots need to be filled.
Absolutely.
Filling all those spots. And so they think, well, you don't need me. And that's hard, that's hard for me because I'm like, nobody's filling the spots. Well, sometimes the spots have to be open
Yes.
for people to fill them, so.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing to know. That's a great thing for our listeners who are churchgoers to know. That's a great thing for our pastor wives who are listening to know. And especially our husbands who are pastors, because we're trying to figure it out. But while we're trying to figure it out, we're hindering somebody else from doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. And I just had someone to say to me the other day, wow, I feel like you don't want me to do work in the church. And I was like, oh, because I'm used to it. The years are gone by. No, don't feel like you can't do. Tell me what you want to do. I can't tell you what to do, but tell me what you want to do. Because when it all boils down, when we are, as pastor wives, doing the roles that are comfortable to us, and when our church members are doing the roles that's comfortable to them, as I always say in marriage, if my needs are being fulfilled by you and your needs are being fulfilled by me, then everybody's needs are being fulfilled. That's what I believe about the church congregation. If you're doing your role, it's going to help me to not have to do it. And if I'm doing my role, it's helping you to not have to do it. And everything is getting done. Like we get caught up in that a whole lot where this is what I'm supposed to be doing. No, you're not. Well, that's just my view. No, you're not. And one of the things that I was challenged with as I was doing my research is when you look at church members have discipleship. We give them discipleship and we teach them, as you said, how to be church members, how to do what's needed in the churches that God has called us to. We have our husbands who are pastors who also have roles in the Bible, because it tells us in places like Ephesians and Corinthians, the husband is supposed to do X, Y, and Z. The pastor is supposed to do X, Y, and Z. But as a pastor's wife, I've not found anything in the Bible to say the pastor's wife is supposed to do X, Y, and Z. So we're trying to figure it out. And that's a good question for me to ask every pastor wife that come on here. Have you ever seen anything in the Bible that says this is what the pastor's wife role is?
No, because I don't think that there's anything that shows that a role that exists. But it's certainly a role that's there. There's a lot of pastors' wives. There wouldn't be a lot of good pastors without them. So,
yeah.
There's nothing in there that specifically says that, but there's a lot of good things on leadership and on women and things that women, I mean, there's so many women leaders in the Bible, And I've done a lot of studies on those, and there's some very strong and powerful women in the Bible, but every pastor's wife serves so differently, because I am up front next to my husband. I can preach a sermon if you need me to, or I can, you know, I can lead a group, or I can do whatever. But there are some pastors' wives that they don't want. That's not the role that they want to do. That's not the role that they've been called to do. I don't understand that. That's not how I work. But there are some women that are called to only just be a support to their husband, and their role is just to support him in ministry, and that's okay. We
Mhm.
serve so differently, and I don't think that God has one way that's better when it comes to how we serve as pastors' wives. I think he just wants us to serve him first and foremost, and
Yeah,
everything else falls into place, and he'll tell us what to do and what we need.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's always one of those touchy things, because for a while I had to be in this box. So I
Mhm.
thought, because it's like, okay, well, you're supposed to just be a teacher, and you can't lead a man. And I'm like, where did they say that at? So I didn't even want to do anything with preaching. I didn't want to do anything with anything. I just wanted to do Sunday school with the kids and make sure everybody had some good snacks. And then I realized, no, God called you to speak. God called you to do everything that he desires for you to do. And you
Yeah.
can't just put yourself in a box because of fear of what other people say. And I think some of the pastor wives struggle with their place because they don't understand that roles are not defined. We have to be honest with what makes us comfortable in ministry, and we have to have those real conversations with our spouses, because a lot of the husbands don't even understand. Like, they're like, okay, well, I came from this particular church and a pastor wife just sat there. Or I came from this particular church and a pastor wife worked with the kids or sang on a choir, and they don't really know what the roles are. And I think that when we have these conversations, they'll be better received, because I also experienced something where I felt like, okay, the church that I belonged to was a unique kind of church. And I was like, I don't think I belong here. Like, I know without a shadow of a doubt I belong to the church, but I didn't have the leadership qualities to let me know that I could do what I knew that God was calling me to do. But
Mm.
God turned it around and made it look different. And that right there showed me, have a conversation with your husband. Let him know what you're thinking, because it starts with the husband and wife, especially when you're in a church plant, when you don't have other churches over top of you or for you to look at, because you're doing something that's unique. Not to say nobody else is doing it, but a lot of churches aren't just one body, they are connected to other bodies. So when you're just one body, you have to definitely have those conversations with your spouse. So when you walk in the church, they're not looking at you like, oh, you're cleaning the dishes and he doesn't know and he's telling you to come and do announcements. So when you have the conversations, it makes for a better relationship in the church. It makes for a better relationship with the congregation. And it definitely makes for a better relationship in a marriage, because I don't know if any other pastor wives are listening, but we take this stuff home with us. We
Yeah.
take ministry home with us. It's no separating ministry from marriage. And we can say we do all day long, but these roles that we take on in ministry also trickles down to what's going to happen when you leave. Because if my husband tell me, and I'm being hypothetical, but if he say, girl, go in there and clean that toilet, and I don't feel like cleaning that toilet today, when I go home, I'm gonna have some choice words. But again, we don't a lot of times we're being told, oh, you need to separate church from home. It's impossible. That's
Right.
just you. I haven't talked to a pastor wife who doesn't say the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
when you go home, you're taking ministry. When you go home, especially when you have little young children, those
Mhm.
children experience stuff because they have roles that's placed on them as well, that
Sure.
are really rarely talked about. So we have to figure out how to communicate about what our roles is and how we're going to get from point A to point B. Is that something that you would agree with or disagree with?
Oh, absolutely agree. You have to have a lot of those conversations of what do you expect from me? Um, you know, we had conversations early on because, like I said, I am called to ministry as much as my husband is. And so a lot of our conversations were, okay, so what do we do with that? Because we served on staff at some churches that were really cool with that. And we served on staff on some churches that they just were not cool with me being in leadership, and she's a woman and she shouldn't, let's just tie her up and throw her in a closet. And you know, we don't have to see her, Um, but so we had to have a lot of those conversations. We actually left a church at one point because they didn't agree with me having a role in leadership. And thankfully I have a very supportive husband who said, if they can't support you in ministry, then this is not the place for us, because we're both called. We both have a calling from the Lord to say, we want to serve in ministry. And when this church came and said, we have an issue with this, you're a woman, you shouldn't be a part of any meeting, or you shouldn't be a part of any kind of leadership. When that was revealed, it was kind of like, yeah, this isn't the place. Not a bad church, not a bad pastor, not a bad pastor's wife, but their philosophy of ministry was different than ours. And so we intentionally sought out churches and said, listen, my husband would say, listen, you're hiring me, but I'm telling you something, I'm a package deal. So that you get kind of a 2-for-1 here, but just so you know, if you hired us, she serves in ministry right alongside me, not behind me.
Amen.
And that's just us.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And that's that communication deal. That's that part where it's an uncomfortable conversation sometimes, but when you have it, it helps you to get on one accord. But guess what? It's 8 o'clock. We have so much more to discuss. So, listeners, pastor wives, members of congregations, pastors, Amy is going to come back with the pastor's wife chat. We're going to talk about some more things, and we're definitely going to hit a little bit more on the roles, because I feel like we can't stop talking about roles. We can't stop letting you know we are church members as well. We are leaders as well. And we're going to probably have some concepts of what our role should be when we come back and talk a little bit. But I think for me, I'm still going to say, I don't know. I just want to do everything. I want everything to run well and run smooth. But yeah. I thank you, Amy, because our time together has been great.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm looking forward to it because, again, as the pastor wives come on, we're going to talk and we're going to talk and we're going to discover some things within us. We're going to discover some things that we can do differently. And if you're like me, I'm looking for the answer to help me figure out, well, what is my real role? Because I still don't think that there's an absolute role for a pastor's wife. And right. I don't want to be the one to say, go find your own role, because every church is different. But for me, I desire to find out what it is that God is telling me to do in the church and to be okay with it. So, yes. Amy, I just thank you. I'm going to give you a few minutes to say any last minute thoughts on this topic or any other topic.
Okay. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this, by the way. Yeah, there's so much more to discuss. There's so many things that I think even our congregations sometimes need to know about their pastors and their pastors' wives and the things that they go through. And so it's great to have these conversations. It's great for other pastors' wives to be able to see, that they're not alone, that we all have these questions, and we're all facing this battle of sometimes feeling so insignificant for what God has called us to do and just not feeling equipped and prepared, but that He is preparing us and that He can place people around us to help us with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Facebook listeners, Trivia's Inspirational Radio listeners, YouTube listeners, even Alexa listeners, we will be back. Tune in tomorrow night. We have another dynamic pastor's wife that's coming on. We will see Miss Amy again very soon. And again, comment, ask us questions because I'll send them to her and we'll work together to try to come up with some answers or just some